All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining our webinar session today, which will focus on the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency's Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program local solicitation. My name is Sam Cook, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Planning with Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, or PCCD, as we are more commonly known. And I'm also delighted to be joined by a couple of colleagues from our Office of Justice Programs, our Executive Office, our Office of Financial Management and Administration, and some other friends who will be helping to shepherd us along for today's session. I'll also be serving as your MC, so I'll be keeping an eye on the questions that you all submit and facilitating a Q&A portion of today's webinar. So before we dive in, just wanted to go over a couple of quick housekeeping rules. So first, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on PCCD's website as soon as it becomes available. There will also be a recording on our YouTube channel as well. A copy of PowerPoint slides from today's presentation will also be made available for reference, so don't feel like you need to scribble everything down furiously while we're presenting. We do encourage you to take a moment to double check your audio settings to make sure you're able to hear today's presentation. Please note that we cannot hear you on this platform. However, you will be able to submit questions through the written Q&A feature in the Microsoft Teams Live event platform, and questions submitted via that Q&A chat, just know that they won't be immediately visible to everybody, but please rest assured that they have been received and are being reviewed by our team throughout today's session. So moving towards today's agenda, we'll be kicking things off with a very brief overview of PCCD for folks who may be less familiar with our agency. We'll then be providing an in-depth discussion and presentation of the Byrne SCIP, which stands for State Crisis Intervention Program local share funding announcement, including a little bit of history about the program. It is a relatively new funding stream for our agency, as well as some important upcoming deadlines to be mindful of. And then we'll also be providing an overview of the funding announcement and application process, how to get started in the e-grants system if you haven't navigated that before or if it's been a minute. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the anticipated funding timelines associated with this funding opportunity. And then last but certainly not least, we've reserved some time to answer some questions that you've submitted. So we'll provide a sort of last call for that as we get a little bit closer to the end of the presentation. So with all of that, let's go ahead and dive right in. So first, just a little bit about our agency. The Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency was established in 1978, so almost 45 years ago to the day, through Pennsylvania state law, and we do serve as the Commonwealth's Justice Planning and Policymaking Agency. Our mission is to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, facilitate delivery of services to victims of crime, and to increase the safety of our communities. So we're a pretty small but growing state agency housed within the executive office here in Pennsylvania. We've got a little more than 100 and change employees working across 4 different offices, and we are directed by an overarching commission board, which is advised by a number of different advisory committees and training boards. So our responsibilities and programs really run the gamut. Lots of different areas related to public safety, everything from funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims compensation and services, and training, among other responsibilities. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these areas or any of our other work, would definitely recommend that you check out our website, which is found at pccd.pa.gov. So with all that being said, I'm now pleased to turn things over to Michael Leister, who serves as PCCD's State Crisis Intervention Program Manager. Michael, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Sam. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. We're certainly excited about the Byrne SCIP funding, and just want to let everyone know that this is a new funding stream for us. So we are right there with you all as we're kind of interested to learn as this progresses, and we see results of kind of the first year of funding. So again, thanks for being here today. And Sam, you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program generally. So the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was passed during the 117th Congress and was signed into law by President Biden in June of 2022. And that really marks the first major gun reform legislation in decades. That bill included a number of important provisions related to gun safety, mental health, and school safety. And one of the provisions was the authorization of $750 million in federal funds to support the new State Crisis Intervention Program, or SCIP, over a 5-year period through fiscal year 2026. Generally, the purpose of SCIP is to implement state crisis intervention court proceedings and related programs and initiatives. At the federal level, SCIP funds are administered by the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA. SCIP utilizes a formula-based funding approach where funds are allocated to each state administering agency, or SAA. PCCD serves as Pennsylvania's SAA and is responsible for administering the SCIP funds. And as a requirement of the SCIP funds, PCC developed a SCIP funding plan and undertook a comprehensive strategic planning process to identify priorities for use of Pennsylvania's SCIP allocation. Next slide, please. And so I think this quote from Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis and also PCCD Chair really hits home when we're talking about SCIP. So every time there's a shooting, there are more victims. The people who are killed, the people who are injured, the family members who are mourning, the survivors who are traumatized, and the community members who are scared to live in their neighborhoods. I know because I was one of those community members. Now, 18 years later, this work is more important than ever. I think it's just a realization that there are victims of gun violence go beyond just those that are directly impacted. And we're seeing across the Commonwealth, family members, survivors, communities in general that are being impacted by this. And so I think from our perspective, we're really excited to see the impact that SCIP can have to potentially reduce gun violence and address some of these issues. Next slide, please. So one of the areas that we really want to highlight is that gun violence takes multiple forms. I know there's a lot of questions and kind of confusion around, well, our county doesn't have a lot of gun violence. So what does that mean? But so again, just really want to highlight this 2019 report from the Police Executive Research Forum, and it noted that gun violence takes 4 different problems with different causes and solutions. And so on this slide, it outlines in Pennsylvania those 4 areas: suicide by firearm, criminal gun homicide, domestic violence and intimate partner gun homicide, and then mass shootings. And really for purposes of the SCIP solicitation, we're going to be looking at gun violence as including interpersonal gun violence, so looking at community gun violence, criminal gun homicide, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, suicide by firearm, and then also accidental and unintentional shootings. So again, we're not just looking at that community violence side that I think a lot of people focus on, and looking at gun violence more broadly and realizing that it takes multiple forms. Next slide, please. Thanks, Sam. So as I previously mentioned, PCCD was required to develop a funding plan for our SCIP allocation. The funding plan provides a roadmap for how we at PCCD will invest approximately $8.5 million in fiscal year 22-23 funds. So the funding plan was developed in consultation with the PCCD Commission, which serves as the required state crisis intervention advisory board for Pennsylvania. So we started the planning process back in the spring and engaged not only the commission as the required crisis intervention advisory board, but also community stakeholders, and really wanted to gather their input. One of the things we did was issue a SCIP survey. I hope some of you who are on this webinar today had the opportunity to take that. But in total, we received 362 responses from individuals across 56 of Pennsylvania's 67 counties. And that input was invaluable in really molding our plan. So the overarching goals of Pennsylvania's fiscal year 22-23 SCIP plan are to advance crisis intervention programs targeting risk factors likely to lead to gun violence and implement projects that support emerging issues and priorities. So the SCIP program plan and budget were approved by the Commission, again, as the Crisis Intervention Advisory Board in June. That plan was submitted to BJA and then subsequently approved in August. So next slide, please. I'm just going to give an overview of the funding announcement, and Sam, you can move to the next slide. So over this slide and next, I'm going to really focus on highlighting the SCIP local share funding priorities that are included in Pennsylvania's approved SCIP plan. So I would note that within our SCIP plan, in addition to the priority areas and the objectives, we also do include numerous proposed approaches for each priority area and objective. So for purposes of time today, we're not going to dive into each of those individually, but I would encourage you to read the SCIP plan. We did outline those in the funding announcement document as well. So please make sure you're taking a look at either of those documents for more specifics. So priority area number 1 is to improve crisis intervention services and supports across behavioral health, civil, legal, and other settings with a focus on reaching people and communities experiencing gun violence. So within priority area number 1, there are 3 related objectives. So the first is support behavioral health and civil legal responses to behavioral health crises. Second, to expand and enhance crisis intervention team programs that align with the CIT Memphis model. And we did provide a link to the CIT model and really want to highlight that we're focused on CIT programs and not just CIT training. And the third objective is to analyze statewide gaps, needs, and support efforts to improve the provision of case management and navigation programs to connect critical services and access effective interventions. Next slide, please. So continuing on to priority area number 2, and that is to improve coordination of services and responses to gun violence victimization. The related objective to priority number 2 is to increase access to services and supports that can help individuals, families, and communities experiencing gun violence recover and begin the healing process. And then finally, priority area number 3 is to address the intersections of domestic violence and intimate partner violence with gun violence. And the related objective for this priority area is to expand the adoption of lethality assessment programs to additional jurisdictions in Pennsylvania. Again, just want to highlight, kind of giving you a 30,000 foot view here of the priority areas and objectives that are included within our SCIP plan. Again, would highly encourage you to go into that SCIP plan, read the funding announcement document, and look at the proposed approaches that we include within there for each of those objectives. So next slide, please. So moving on to funding availability, PCCD has announced a combined total of $3,524,428 in federal fiscal year 22-23 Byrne SCIP local and under 10K share funds to support this funding announcement. I won't get into the difference between the local and under 10K share funds. They are separate requirements of PCCD to get funds in the hands of local jurisdictions. On the back end of this funding announcement, we will determine which applicants are eligible for the under 10K share and which applicants will receive the local share. So for the 22-23 Byrne SCIP local solicitation, eligible applicants can request up to $200,000 to support proposed project activities over a 2-year project period starting on April 1st of 2024. PCCD does expect to fund approximately 18 grant awards, and funds must be used for proposed projects that support one or more of the priority areas, objectives, and proposed approaches identified in the funding announcement. Applicants are not required to address all of the priority areas, objectives, and proposed approaches, but they may support multiple. Only projects that are in support of the proposed approaches within our pre-skip plan and funding announcement document are eligible for funding under this solicitation. Next slide, please. So the eligible applicants for the SCIP local solicitation are limited to local units of government. So local units of government include counties, cities, municipalities, and towns. Eligible applicants may submit one application under the solicitation. And that said, again, just want to reiterate that, well, you're not required to focus on every priority objective or proposed approach. An application may address multiple of those. So again, well, applicants are only allowed to submit one application. They may address multiple areas within that application. Also want to highlight that while direct awards through the SCIP local solicitation are limited to local units of government, do just want to note that in addition to these eligible applicants, that SCIP funds can be used to support a wide range of subrecipients. So including, but not limited to, courts at the state, county, and local level, institutions of higher education, law enforcement, supervision agencies, prosecutors, public defenders, behavioral health, emergency communications. That's really up to the eligible applicant on who they want to partner with for this funding. And so next slide, please. So next, I wanted to highlight some eligible and then also ineligible program activities and expenses. So on the eligible side, this includes things like salaries and benefits for personnel, including overtime, contractors and or consultants, supplies and equipment, training, travel and transportation expenses, including vehicle leases, indirect costs that do not exceed the federally approved rate or the de minimis 10% rate, and other activities deemed necessary to meet the needs of programs and participants. On the ineligible side, this includes things like prizes, rewards, entertainment, trinkets, really any type of monetary incentive, client stipends, gift cards, food and beverage, lobbying, land acquisition, unmanned aircraft systems, and any unallowable costs that are listed in the DOJ grants financial guide. And when we send this PowerPoint out, there is a link directly to that guide. So next slide, please. And so I took you through some of the specifics of the funding announcement and just SCIP in general. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dave McMeekin. Dave is the new State Crisis Intervention Program Specialist here at PCCD, and Dave is going to walk us through navigating the application process. So Dave.
Thank you, Michael. And hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar. Again, my name is Dave McMeekin, and I am a program analyst here in the Office of Justice Programs in the Unit of Criminal Justice Systems Improvements. Jumping into this next slide, which highlights the application process for the SCIP local solicitation, which will have multiple phases. As local units of government, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with PCCD's process for applications received through competitive solicitations. However, we wanted to briefly provide an overview for those that may not be familiar. First, applications are submitted to PCCD through the eGrant system. Applications for the SCIP local solicitation are due on December 20th, 2023. Once the application period closes, PCCD will begin the review and scoring process. Once the review and scoring process is complete, PCCD will submit recommended applications for approval to the relevant advisory committee. For the skip local solicitation, applications will go to the Mental Health and Justice Advisory Committee, which is also known as MAGIC. After approval at the advisory committee level, recommended applications are sent to the commission for approval. Once the commission approves, PCCD staff typically work with the applicant to address any issues identified in the application during the review process. And when all issues are addressed, grants are awarded. I say typically because for applications received through the skip local solicitation, there's an additional layer of approval as all awards must be approved by BJA. So after PCCD works with applicants to address any issues and applications are finalized and ready for approval, PCCD will then submit applications to BJA for the review and approval. Upon approval from BJA, grants will be awarded by PCCD. Next slide, please. To reiterate, eligible applicants must submit applications using PCCD's e-grant system. Applications must be submitted electronically in PCCD's e-grant system by 11:59 p.m. on December 20th, 2023. Final recommendations of projects will be made following the receipt and review of applications and e-grants. I am now going to turn it over to Heather Hewitt so she can walk us through getting started in e-grants. Heather.
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dave stated, you do have to create an application in eGrants. So this is going to walk you through creating an eGrants account. The first thing you'll need to do is register your organization with eGrants. And these links on this PowerPoint do take you to those guides. So that's just a little tip there. Step 3, request roles in eGrants to make sure you have the right users and permissions set up. Next slide. Okay, so the agency registration, there is an eGrants agency registration request form. You can find that if you go to PCCD's homepage. There's an eGrants icon. Your agency must be properly registered in eGrants if you intend to apply for a grant. And if you do the paper form, or if you have the form, they can be returned to the email address that's listed here at the bottom of the page. Next slide. And when you register for eGrants, in order to access, create an application and actually work on it, you do need what we call user roles. And there are 6 different roles that you can have. You can have more than one person in your agency can have these same roles, but they are the financial creator who can view and create fiscal information, the financial reader who can view fiscal information, the program creator who can view and create program information, and the program reader who can view program information. The submission role allows you to submit grant forms. If you do not have that role, but you have maybe one of the creator roles, you can work on the grant. You just cannot or at the application, I'm sorry, you just cannot actually submit it. So that is an important role to have. And then the final role listed is the user manager role. And this person manages the user roles for the agency's grants. But if you have this role, you would still need to have one of the creator or reader roles to do anything else in the application. Next slide. And it's important to note that every agency must register 2 users in order to complete their grant application. So just keep that in mind when you get started. Next slide. And every agency should have that agency user manager role. This person approves role requests and they maintain existing security for people who are already established with their agency and eGrants. And we do have a user manager help guide that's also available on the eGrants page of our website. Next slide. Oh, thank you. If you have any questions, we do have an eGrants help desk. They can be contacted using the email address on the screen. You may call, and we are available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Obviously, we're closed on any holidays that PCCD would be closed. And then we do have some useful resources here as well to get you started. I apologize, Sam, I'm not sure who I go to next.
Thank you, Heather. I got it.
Nope, back to Dave.
Yes. Thanks again, Heather. So going into the what's in the application slide, for the fiscal year 2022-23, Byrne skipped local solicitation funding announcement document, which outlines the scored and required sections, which start on page 8. This solicitation includes 6 scored sections, which you can see on this slide here. First is the executive summary. In this 5-point section, applications should follow the prompt provided to give a brief overview of the proposed project. Second, the budget detail is 15 points and provides a line item budget breakdown and justification for any proposed costs. Third, the statement of problem is 20 points and establishes the problem the applicant is seeking to address and how the problem was identified. Fourth, the target areas and populations section is 15 points and identifies the target area or areas and population or populations that will be served by the proposed program. Fifth, the project description is 30 points and provides a plan for proposed project implementation. Lastly, the performance measures, impact, and outcomes section is 15 points and describes how the outcomes of the proposed project will be measured. While it is not scored, the required attachment section is where all applicants are required to submit resumes or cover letters for all identified personnel and letters of support and or commitment or similar documentation, such as MOUs for all named project partners, including any proposed subrecipients. I just want to note that applicants are strongly encouraged to carefully read and review the written funding announcement document prior to starting their eGrants application. Next slide, please. For this slide, I want to briefly highlight a few areas for once applications are awarded. First, PCCD grants are reimbursed based, meaning the money isn't provided up front for project expenses. Grantees are required to submit quarterly fiscal reports, and this is how they are reimbursed for grant activity. That said, grantees can work with PCCD to utilize more frequent fiscal reports to increase the frequency of payments. Grantees can only receive reimbursement for funding for actual expenses approved by PCCD and BJA. If an expense is not included in the approved budget, you cannot receive reimbursement for that expense. In general, grant funds are designed to support project and program related expenses, not general operating costs. And finally, PCCD funding must supplement, not supplant, existing funding sources and programs. Next slide, please. Some other important steps to prepare. First, if you aren't already registered in PCCD eGrant system, please do so as soon as possible. Second, register as a non-procurement Commonwealth vendor if you are not already registered. Third, establish banking details to facilitate payments via ACH. And finally, ensure your agency's federal SAM and UEI registration. Next slide, please. So how do you ask questions? If you have any today, please include them in the chat, and we will do our best to address during the Q&A session. If you have any questions after today's webinar, please submit them to our resource account. Answers for all questions received by the resource account will be posted on PCCD's funding announcement Q&A page. Please check out the Q&A page before asking a question, as we might have already answered it. Even if you don't have a question, please read the Q&A page before submitting your application. Someone may have asked a question that you didn't know you needed the answer to. Next slide, please. Looking at the anticipated timeline for the SCIP local solicitation, the funding announcement opened on October 31st. The informational webinar is obviously today, November 14th, and staff will respond to any questions received by December 13th. The deadline for applications is December 20th. Over the course of January 2024, the review team will score applications and finalize recommendations. Funding recommendations will be presented to MAGIC for initial approval at the January 31st, 2024 meeting. Next slide, please. to continue. The MAGIC approved applications will be presented to the full commission at the March 13th, 2024 meeting. Approved projects will have an April 1st, 2024 start date. The start date is contingent upon approval by BJA. Project implementation will take place over the next 2 years and conclude on March 31st, 2026. And I will now pass the microphone back to Michael Leister for the FAQ session.
Thanks, Dave. And you go to the next slide, please, Sam. So we wanted to cover a few FAQs that typically come up. So first, if an individual line items are under $10,000, what do I need to do? Well, in this situation, this is considered a micro purchase. So we ask you to please review the micro purchase details in the procurement details section of the eGrants application. You can also find out more information in PCCD's applicant's manual. We get a lot of questions about what is a sole source. So sole source contracts are non-competitive procurements that allow a single supplier to fulfill the needs of the contractual requirements. So all sole source information must be submitted and approved by PCCD before proceeding, and only applies to items over $10,000. Within your application, that sole source information is provided in the procurement details section. Excuse me. So another question: do we need to get a separate checking account? So, well, this is not required. It is standard for PCCD. Your organization should still be able to track the funding separately. For the fourth Q&A, so I received bids prior to the project start date. Do they still count? So yes, these bids do still count as long as they are still valid and within a reasonable time frame. So next slide, please. So again, Dave went over this, but is my PCCD grant reimbursement only? So yes, PCCD grants are reimbursement only. However, we do realize that larger purchases may create cash flow issues for grantees, especially for some smaller organizations. So generally, submitting fiscal reports more frequently to request reimbursement greatly assists in alleviating this issue. Again, as Dave highlighted, you're required to submit a quarterly fiscal report. However, if you are awarded, you can work with PCCD staff to submit those fiscal reports and receive payments on a more frequent basis. And the next question is, do my vendors need to be registered with the Commonwealth? So no, only the applicant agency needs to be registered. The payments go to the grantees, and then that agency is responsible for paying their vendors. And next slide, please. So we frequently get questions around, does my organization need a UEI number? And so our response is, if your PCCD grant is federally funded, your organization will need a unique entity identifier, or UEI number, to receive funding. You can register for the UEI on sam.gov. And because SCIP funds are federally funded, all applicants will need a UEI number. And I believe this is the last FAQ, but what if an item ends up going over $10,000, but it wasn't anticipated? So the item must be bid, or the organization must complete a sole source request that must be submitted and approved by PCCD. So again, more information about the sole source process is available in that procurement details section, and also in the applicant's manual that was linked 2 slides previously. So if you go to the next slide, please. So other questions. If folks have any questions, again, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A. We did receive a few questions with the webinar registration. Just briefly wanted to go over a few of those. So we did get a question about how to address all 3 priority areas. And we just, again, wanted to highlight that for the purposes of the SCIP solicitation, Applicants do not have to report or do not have to address all 3 priority areas, but must address at least one. They can support multiple, can address all 3 if they'd like, but at minimum just have to address one of those priority areas. Another question that we got was, my organization is a nonprofit. Am I eligible to apply? So unfortunately, the answer is no. Eligible applicants, again, for the solicitation are limited to local units of government. However, as described in the written funding announcement, applicants may include a wide range of proposed subrecipients of their SCIP funding as part of their application. That could include nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, other entities. Again, that would be up to the local unit of government to decide who they would like to work with. We did get some questions that are more specific. Can we do certain things with this funding? Can funds be utilized to hire new staff attorneys or social workers? We got a question around, is this grant relevant to Fortress probation? Unfortunately, questions of that nature we're not able to respond to due to the competitive nature of the solicitation. So we will post those in the Q&A. But again, because of the competitive nature, we can't really provide any specific guidance on particular programs, approaches, or activities. So I think that gives an overview of the questions that we've received through the registration. And I think Sam is going to take us through and see if we had any questions entered into Q&A.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael. We did get a question submitted, so I would encourage you, if you have a burning question, something you're curious about, or an issue or topic that you want our team to dig in a little bit further on, we've certainly reserved some time to go through those. So please feel free to submit those questions using the Q&A section of the platform. Otherwise, you can see on this screen, there is an email address where you can direct those questions after the fact. So I'll start with the first question that we received. This one's from Lori. She asked, or they asked, can I request funding from April 2024 through December 2025, as we will be seeking another expansion and other funding sources beginning in January 2026. So I think, Michael, I'll toss this to you. I think what that's asking is essentially, can you do a different time period for your project other than the standard 2 years that's allowed in the funding announcement?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that obviously the funding announcement is geared towards 2 years, but if you were looking at a more condensed project period, I think that would be fine. Obviously, we would like everything to go for 2 years, but in the event that you expend your funds early, we can have the ability to close out grants before a project period ends. So I think that would be just fine. Okay,
perfect. I'm not seeing any other questions submitted so far, so I'm going to see if there's any that sneak in. Michael, or perhaps even Greg Carhigh from our fiscal team, is there anything else that you think would be important for folks to bear in mind? I know we went through some frequently asked questions, but just any other issues that we frequently encounter or see applicants encounter, any resources that you think would be important to highlight for folks while we're seeing if any questions come through?
I would just reiterate the slide earlier in the presentation about how gun violence takes multiple forms. Again, in just some casual conversation with folks, I think there's been maybe a little confusion, especially for maybe some smaller counties that don't have as high of rates as gun violence. So, again, we're looking at this as a broader view of gun violence that doesn't just include community gun violence. That's one piece of it. So I'd encourage folks to look at things a little bit more broadly, and really encourage everyone to apply that has an interest.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. And just a shameless plug, PCCD has done a decent amount of research and work in the gun violence related space. So if you're looking for resources or data on how to either capture those various aspects of gun violence, would definitely encourage you to check out. There's a special counsel on gun violence report that we published a couple of years back that highlights some data related to Pennsylvania trends. And there's also a lot of other resources that are linked throughout our website that might be of use to you all as you're building that case. I don't see any other questions submitted, so knowing we're all super busy people, I'm happy to give back the floor to Michael to close us out. And again, if, oh, actually, I spoke too soon. There's one, there's one in here. So we got a question. Are there any required dollar matches for recipients? For example, every $3 of funding needs the recipient to match $1. So Michael, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Yeah, there are no match requirements for SCIP funds.
Perfect. It was an easy one.
Very easy. I take questions like that all day, folks.
All right, well, if you have any more questions, easy or otherwise, give it like another 10 or so seconds and see if anything comes in. Otherwise, again, make sure you take note of that email address. It is also written all over the funding announcement as well. Again, just appreciate everyone's time. I don't see anything else coming through. So Michael, I'm going to turn it back over to you so you can wrap us up. Thanks,
Sam. Yeah, and as Dave said, please be sure to check out the funding announcement Q&A document. That's on PCCD's website. We update that regularly with any questions that come through. To date, I think we've only received one question, but we will update it with the questions that we did receive through the webinar registration. I would just also note for everyone that, again, this is our first year of SCIP funding. It's a combined allocation for the fiscal year. It's 22 and 23. But again, SCIP is funded through fiscal year 26. And so PCCD anticipates that we'll have about $4.27 million on an annual basis through fiscal year 26. As a requirement of SCIP funds, we are required to direct funds to local government. So this is not the only SCIP funding announcement that will be out there. There will be additional funding in the future for upcoming fiscal years. So I would just say for folks that do apply, if you're not selected and your application does not move forward and does not get awarded, I would say please don't be discouraged and apply again. We will have additional funding. And then again, we just encourage anyone, any local units of government to apply. And they're just generally, we're really excited to see how SCIP goes. Again, you know, it's a learning experience for us here at PCCD with this being the first year of a new funding stream. So again, anyone has questions, please send them to our resource account. We will respond to any questions by December 13th. Please remember that the funding announcement closes on December 20th. Make sure you submit your applications no later than 11:59 p.m. And really just want to say thank you for all the participants that were here today. Folks that asked questions, we really appreciate you, and we're looking forward to this. And we did get one last Q&A, shameless plug for the 2024 CIT Symposium. Sure, absolutely. That's going to take place, I believe, in September of 2024 in State College. So folks who have been to the CIT Symposium before, we hope you join us again. For any new folks, that's a great day-long opportunity to learn about all the awesome stuff that's happening in the CIT world across Pennsylvania. So we'll have more information about that soon. One other shameless plug from the PCCD side is the 2024 Criminal Justice Advisory Board Conference will be held in State College at the Penn Stater on April 9th and 10th of 2024. So we're in the process of finalizing our plenary sessions and breakouts. And so there will be more information about that here in the relatively near future. And we'll get a registration link open sometime in 2024. So again, please feel free to submit any questions. Thank you again for attending today. We really appreciate you all and hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.